the top 10 key areas to learn in cloud computing in 2020. Now, as we're likely familiar, there's a lot of new technologies out there, or what I would call hybrids of existing technologies. And it's really important to, I think, appreciate perhaps where these technologies are going and what companies are looking for as well. Thanks again for the great introduction, Shane, as well. More information on me there. So by the end of this webinar, I want to make sure that we have a grasp of understanding what companies are really looking for. The reality is that there's a lot of folks that know cloud, and there's a lot of folks that are really good at cloud as well, whether it's AWS or whether it's Google or Azure or Alibaba or IBM, whatever the platform is. It's really important that companies now are starting to have to distinguish between candidates. Also, too, one of the things that you don't read about on LinkedIn is a lot of companies now are starting to get 200 to 400 applications. That tells you that the cloud computing market is getting saturated. There's actually more and more prospective employees or candidates than there are jobs. And that is really what is going on in a lot of these markets. So the goal of this webinar is to give you some ideas of what you can do to distinguish yourself and be successful in cloud computing in 2020. And I won't even get into what, the current concerns are with this, whatever epidemic, let's say. But anyways, what I'm trying to get at is the market is turning extremely competitive, and we really need to know what we can do to up the ante. So let's go ahead and find out what the top 10 key areas are to learn in 2020. I'll also talk about the skills as well, like AI, blockchain, Python, cloud native, and more. Those are some of the top 10. I'll also talk about resources as well when I go through this, because one of the things I want to give you as well is where you can go to look to actually clarify what I'm talking about. Now, with that said, here is sort of some did you know sort of factoids that I think is really interesting. The first is global knowledge. Now, global knowledge is, of course, a very widely known training organization. They've been around, 20, 30 years. One of the things that they're known for, and candidates always like to look for, is their annual surveys, their salary surveys. Surprisingly, for 2020, the GCP Cloud Architect was actually the highest paid professional certification, and the average salary was $175,000 and change. The AWS Solutions Architect was second. So just some notes there. Now, another area is Kubernetes. So with GKE K8, as it's also known, the demand for experience in K8 is actually probably the greatest of any, what I would call, technology I've seen in the last 25 plus years of IT. And what I mean is, you don't really need to be an expert in Kubernetes, but knowing how to deploy containers, whether it's Docker, Swarm, or GKE on Google Cloud, is a really big deal. Companies are going all in because of the benefits. So, for example, this is actually from Indeed. One of the things that they saw, now Indeed is a job, I guess, a search engine, where you go, sort of like similar to Monster. And basically they saw between 2015 and 2019, the share of Kubernetes jobs grew by 2,141%. Wow, that is just humongous from a skill perspective. LinkedIn Learning had an annual report that went through basically the skills that are most needed in 2020. Blockchain was considered the #1 hard skill. as far as Stack Overflow, now if you're familiar with Stack Overflow, they're a developer-centric sort of like website that sort of serves several purposes, sort of like getting help with development issues, etc. But Python has been rated as the #1 fastest growing language in demand. It actually overtook Java. Also, too, plenty of good information on AI, ML, and UX as well. All right, let's get into the top 10. Now, I just want to clarify. Now, I'm sort of basing this sort of on a quasi-scientific approach where I use not only my own experience, but also what I see in Google Trends. And one of the things that I can tell you right now that I see a big demand around is certainly professionals that can actually use services like BigQuery or RDS in AWS, for example, and actually put together a data solution and derive value from that data. So data science, big data is a really big deal. It's really in demand. One of the things that I think is important is, again, the increase in command isn't as, what I would call steep as Kubernetes or blockchain, but it's there. So with that said, data scientists are in demand. Now, not just any data scientists. It does seem, looking at Google Trends and looking at LinkedIn, and also I think it was Monster I looked at as well, it looks like the main skill sets that are tied to a data scientist is going to be machine learning, data mining, data analytics, Python, and R. So that's actually quite a bit. That's not an easy job. These are very wide areas to actually learn and know. And this is sort of true as well, whether you are really a cloud expert in a platform or in specific technologies like data science, big data. The demand for a lot of these professionals is starting to peak. There is demand. It's just getting more competitive. It used to be that if you added like, a data scientist and data mining to your resume, you would be called like within that same week for an interview. Now, again, some of the jobs, are definitely attracting, 100, 200 resumes. Now, demand is high, so there's no question still. Salary is around $95,000 a year, so it just depends on, a lot of factors like experience, where you're located, the type of company you work for too. Like, for example, if you work for like some of the social media companies like Facebook or Google, etc., their salaries are going to be very high, compared to this. This is just, again, sort of a wide national estimate. So that was pretty much from Glassdoor on what they estimated. All right. Now, also too, one thing too, and I just want to clarify this, so I'm going to go back one more. So like when we talk about data science and big data, it's not just a data scientist. It's not just, for example, that title. Let me get my highlighter here. So just think here again, it's not just the title data scientist. It really is a bunch of titles that fall into this category. The most common is data scientist, data engineer, qualitative analyst, or data analyst. So it's a wide area, wide net in titles. Also, too, this is an interesting fact as well from LinkedIn. 84% of enterprises plan to launch some type of initiative around making decisions based on data. So this is an area that still has a lot of growth, and a lot of enterprises are still not mature in this area. All right, let's talk about number 9, Python. Okay, there is no question that Python just blows all the other programming languages away from a demand perspective. Now, I will say though, if you go to certain websites, sometimes they'll have Java still as number one. Again, Monster might have a little different result. LinkedIn might have a little different result. But when it comes to developer-focused languages, Python is clearly rated number one on numerous websites. So again, you can see Python still, by far, when we look at, for example, here, Python to JavaScript, that's what, about an 8+% or so difference. So it has the lead. So this is a big deal when it comes to knowing Python, because Python really falls into a lot of different areas. Like, for example, data science and data warehousing, but it also falls into machine learning. It also falls into AI as well in some respects, and blockchain for that matter, and just cloud native in some respects. So it's a wide net to be a Python specialist. But the main demand that typically comes up is going to be data warehousing, enterprise integration. Now, this is a big deal. I actually ran into an old manager that I knew, and I was talking to him about probably about 4 months ago, 5 months ago, and he was saying he could find people that knew Python, but he couldn't find people that could actually take an existing enterprise application and port it over properly. And that's always a big deal, is how do you take a legacy app and port it over from Perl or something, right? Again, this is always that challenge. So if you have proven enterprise integration experience, you are going to see likely some kind of demand. Again, it could be dependent on where you're located, but the good part too, a lot of these jobs are remote or can be remote. So according to the 2019 Stack Overflow survey, Python is still the fastest growing language. According to Indeed, there's over, first let me back up. Excuse me, get some water. Okay, according to Indeed, Python is the most demanding programming language in the USA job market, and had the highest number of job postings at 74,000. And when I looked at, like, I think it was Java, or I think it was one of the smaller languages like Ruby, it was like 20,000 plus more. So it was actually a pretty substantial difference. So Python is in demand. The one thing I will say, it doesn't seem to really pull a high salary in a lot of markets, and it brings down the average from a nationwide perspective. So just be aware of that. So don't get the salary as like sort of like defining factor. I think a lot of it is, if, again, like I was saying, can you prove you're an enterprise expert in application integration? If you can, that salary will jump up considerably. All right, number 8, site recovery engineering. I know this is a surprise probably. You don't really see a lot or hear a lot about it, but it's always in a lot of job descriptions in a discrete manner. And that's usually around availability. That's around software integration. That's going to be also focused in DevOps as well. So site recovery engineering is really a unique specialization. So what is it? SRE is going to create a bridge between development and operations. And I'll talk about where DevOps fits in 1 second, because there's always confusion with SRE and DevOps and what is what. But with SRE, it pulls in availability, latency, performance, etc. But most importantly, this is a software engineering specialization. So if you're a software developer and you're good at making sure that applications are available, this could be your dream job. So what is the difference between DevOps and SRE? The main difference is that, again, SRE is more what? Operationally driven from the top down. And it's governed by the development team. Whereas DevOps is more, again, driven by operations with development. And also too, with DevOps, again, it's depends on your organization in a lot of respects. But with that said, it's more about software architecture, whereas DevOps is really more rolling out software that's safe and secure the first time. So that's sort of like the main difference in some respects. So SRE is a buzzword that we see quite a bit more. And the key words that you're going to see is right here. Anything around software architecture, and you see this, they're talking about this. Next up, cloud security. All right, now this was an area that I think still is maturing, and again, is an area that clearly has a lot of demand. It's just that there isn't what I would call a mature sort of like what I would call framework to go by on what a cloud security engineer does, I think, is sort of the way I look at it. But basically, here is the best definition of what a security engineer would do, but you want to just substitute with cloud, basically. And the goal is to manage the cloud platform instead of the internal platform like on-prem. Now, the areas that cloud security really shows a demand is, again, for folks that are able to go in and understand the shared security model and also implement areas from the enterprise perspective that is going to secure the solution. Now, there's a high demand for security forensics experts. So folks that can detect and deter breaches or respond for that matter. Now, common roles. So this is what I was saying as well, where you see a lot of cloud security roles, but it's not like it's like a full-time job or a job that sort of states you're a cloud security expert or anything. It's more like an IT security specialist, for example, a security analyst, security manager, network security engineer, so on and so on. But I am starting to see actually quite a bit of what would be called cloud security managers or cloud security engineer roles. So these roles have high demand. I know because I probably have been pinged, not that I'm looking for a job, probably 4 to 6 times in the last 2 months. A lot of these jobs, though, again, they're in the financial sector typically, or another sector that seems to hire a lot of cloud security experts would be more the federal government as well, is sort of the areas that I typically see this. And I don't see like cloud security managers coming up a lot around, other sectors like education, basically manufacturing, logistics, not yet anyways. But I did want to point out too, the average salary was about $140,000. And that's according to RHI, which is Robert Half International. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to speak up, and I'll definitely take a minute after the break, after we're done here. When it comes to also other areas around IT security is DevSecOps. Now, this is another phenomena that I'm starting to see. This was a term that I think has only been around maybe 3 years effectively. And I'm starting to see DevSecOps as part of a lot of job descriptions. So I'm sort of adding that to the cloud security aspect. So this is basically where security is actually incorporated into your testing, into your rollouts, into your pipelines, your automation. And here's an example of a typical DevOps cycle. And then here is the new DevOps cycle, stated as Larry Macaroni. Hopefully that's close to how you say his name. But basically, as you see, you have where after test, validate, predict, analyze, and then again, configure, deploy, monitor, etc. And you see there that there's additional steps in the cycle. Number 6 is blockchain. Now, blockchain is a growing area of demand. However, it seems to be relegated to specific sectors similar to cloud security. When it comes to blockchain, I'm really talking about enterprise blockchain, not Bitcoin, not Monero, not Facebook Libra or anything like that. No stable coins. When it comes to enterprise blockchains, organizations are actually looking for folks that can discuss blockchain. Now, let me talk about what that really means. For example, if you're a pre-sales engineer, if you go to LinkedIn now, you will come up with blockchain in a lot of job descriptions now. Or if you're even a systems engineer or a role like that. So pre-sales, customer facing, we have to now understand it is more than just cryptos. So enterprise blockchain is really now a water cooler subject. Also too, LinkedIn in their annual report, the LinkedIn Learning Annual Report that is, identified blockchain as the #1 hard skill. So blockchain such as Hyperledger Fabric, Quorum, and Corda are considered enterprise blockchains. When it comes to really where the demand is though in blockchain, the demand is twofold. If you go to LinkedIn and you type in blockchain into jobs, you'll get probably, I don't know what it is this week or last week, but could be 4,000 roles, let's say, in the US that has blockchain in the description. That's the description. The reality is 99% of the return that you'll get on LinkedIn is not going to be like where the job is actually a blockchain architect or a blockchain trainer or a blockchain engineer or anything, or even a developer. Generally, most of the demand still in blockchain is a skill to know, not a role. And that's really the differentiating factor that I want to be clear about, because one thing as a blockchain expert who has been doing this since day one pretty much when blockchain was released, I can tell you right now, the roles are still in what I would call flux. And what that means is this: the demand is there for you to know blockchain in your current role. It's just the demand for blockchain roles is still not totally there, unless if you're a developer. This is where the demand is. So right now, being able to integrate enterprise apps with the blockchain is still a hot skill. So developers that know how to integrate, and you see this pattern again, right? Remember with Python, same thing. If you know Python, and also a lot of blockchains use Python, or at least a couple. With that said, it's really, do you know how to take an application and apply it to a blockchain, integrate it with your current enterprise? Can command over 200,000 a year. So clearly the role pays well because there is demand, but again, it's pretty limited to the expertise area. And again, it's going to be focused on areas like Python, Solidity, JavaScript, Rust, and a few more. So like Solidity is a development language that was developed specifically for Ethereum. And again, it's all about specialization in this area. So again, high salary, high demand. Also though, be warned, blockchain roles are still what I would call very targeted as far as location. So locations are going to be New York City, usually San Jose, San Francisco, London, Toronto, Singapore, a few other hubs as well. But again, you don't really see blockchain, maybe DC now a little bit, but you don't see a lot of blockchain roles in Boston or in Texas or Miami or anything like that. So what I'm trying to get at is the roles are still limited in location and scope. But the demand is there to a degree, depending on what you want to do. Okay, so that's the good news. Now, I did want to point out one more thing. So with the cloud, for example, and I don't know if I put it here. Did I skip over that? One thing though is a lot of companies are actually deploying their clouds on a blockchain as a service. And that's pretty much how I got into it, was because I had a customer ask about Hyperledger Fabric on AWS. And again, what I'm trying to get at is with the cloud, you may very well deploy blockchains on AWS or Azure, which have both excellent services around blockchain. Also too, now companies that do look for blockchain expertise currently now, widely actually, is Microsoft, Facebook, Google, Walmart, Bank of America, also the US government, all looking for blockchain experts. But like I said, it's mainly development is most of the focus. Number 5, here's another surprise, Google Cloud Platform. Now, I actually was one of the few that took the initial Google Cloud Architect exam back about 4 years ago. I was one of the first to market learning it and teaching it for that matter. I will say that things have changed quite a bit in the last year. Demand is there. Demand is going to scale, I think. And another thing too is a lot of organizations still don't realize the power of Google Cloud, but I think Google Cloud is doing a better job. Now, I think I mentioned this already. This was the highest paid certification this past year. And again, that's a survey of the GK customers that, you know, are basically cloud architects. So when it comes to Google Cloud, it's not just cloud architects. Data engineers, developers, and DevOps specialists are in very high demand. And if you go to just LinkedIn and you search for those, you'll see that Google Cloud is listed quite a bit lately. But on the other hand, you know, I don't want to say that Google Cloud has taken over the world. They're still way behind in market share, but they are gaining shares quite a bit of the market. For example, this is from 2019 Q4, and this is from Canalys. This is an analyst firm that is looking at the different cloud providers. So Google Cloud year over year, quarter over quarter, annual growth was 67%. Azure as well, and AWS has really slowed down growth as well. But again, from a market share perspective, AWS is about 7 billion, Azure is 3 billion, and Google Cloud is 1 billion. And they're pretty much tied with Alibaba. Now, again, Alibaba is more of a Chinese play than anything. Really don't see Alibaba in the US. You could use it, but it seems like it's really focused on the top 3 here. Now, what are some of the services though? Compute Engine, App Engine, Google, for example, GKE, which is Kubernetes engine. So the Kubernetes, we'll talk about here. Machine learning services like Cloud ML, DevOps services as well, and TensorFlow. Number 4, AWS. Okay, it really wouldn't be fair to mention cloud platform without AWS. There's no question. Demand for AWS professionals is still there. They have the second highest salary. The skill sets that seem to be taking really the bulk of the demand right now is infrastructure as code, DevOps, cloud native, and AI. These are the services that you might want to learn if you want to get that highly paid role with AWS deployments. Number 3, AI and machine learning. These sort of go together, and I'd also add like neural networks, etc., as part of this. But basically, again, this is really a niche area as well. There isn't a lot of people that know this, or at least a lot of people that are good at it. So with AI, it is more or less an umbrella under which machine learning and deep learning sort of fall under. So when I say AI, it's really more than just AI. It's really a few, subject areas in itself. So AI really, relies on neural networks, and that's what I was sort of talking about. So it's a wide area. It's a real niche area still. The market is expected to grow from 1.5 billion to 8 billion by 2022, which is, again, a huge growth rate of 44% or so, which still is not like Kubernetes from a demand perspective, but it is, a good area if you're good in it. There isn't a lot of people that are good candidates in this area. And you will see a lot of these roles stay posted forever because there just isn't enough candidates that know this area. Now, the average salary for someone that is an AI professional is around 140 per year. The areas that, again, that come up over and over, and again, you're seeing a pattern here, right? Python and Java, R, and also C++, interestingly enough. And again, these are just some of the other areas that come up. Now, also too, an area around AI and machine learning is around knowing Apache Spark. So it's not just programming, but it's also knowing how to use basically open source and third-party basically technologies like Apache Spark and TensorFlow as well. Also too, like with Google Cloud, they have a TPU, which is a TensorFlow processing unit. So chances are, if you use TensorFlow, you're going to use it on Google Cloud. That's generally what we would see. So if you want to get into Google Cloud, TensorFlow, AI, you're not going to have a lot of competition. Number 2, cloud native. This is a buzzword we hear over and over and over. Cloud native, cloud native, cloud native. What is it? What's it really mean? Well, basically, this is a skill set that is actually really up there with Kubernetes. And sometimes people confuse it as Kubernetes, but it doesn't have to be Kubernetes. It could be, Docker. It could be any other technologies for containers, whatever you want to do, right? Could be Mesos, whatever you feel like. So cloud native is really more of a development term that's going to describe container-based environments and services. It's about developing our applications and services. So what does that sound like? It's about microservices. These technologies are going to be managed on an elastic infrastructure. So what does that mean? That means the cloud. We could scale up, we could scale down. And also, as part of this is DevOps, right? It comes into play. We need to know DevOps as part of this. Development and operations. Really, it's an agile, relationship. Just here's some terms that sort of come into play with DevOps and also Kubernetes, but also just development pipelines as well. Continuous integration, delivery, and deployment. One thing, again, that you're going to see over and over, whether you're an architect or a developer or even a cloud engineer, is we absolutely need to know how to deploy a pipeline. Why we want to deploy a pipeline. So this is very important to know for a lot of jobs now. Now, the 4 axes of DevOps is culture, process, people, and technology. Now, to get into DevOps properly is really another whole session itself, but I just want to highlight why it is becoming so important. Organizations really want to deploy services in a microservices approach that they can be agile, but also secure and also efficient all at the same time. The goal is to have testing processes and also, have manual processes, but remove those manual decisions down the road when we go from a delivery to a deployment perspective. It comes down to automation. All right, number 1 is going to be Kubernetes. There is absolutely no doubt from a demand perspective, far and wide, Kubernetes is absolutely the need to know skill for 2020. If you go to LinkedIn right now, you're going to be overwhelmed by the number of jobs that are looking for people that have this skill set. Again, I wouldn't say that there's a lot of jobs per se that where you're a Kubernetes administrator all the time. But if you're a developer, if you're a cloud architect, if you're a cloud engineer, Kubernetes is on that job description probably 60, 70% of the time now lately. Companies are deploying applications in a environment now that typically not only is on-prem or the cloud, but in a hybrid deployment. And this brings in Kubernetes, which is perfect for this type of deployment. Again, open source, it's for basically automating, deploying, scaling, and managing our applications on containers. Now, where does that come in with the cloud? Well, the cloud providers have excellent services around GKE, for example, in Google Cloud, AWS, Elastic Container Service, for example, Azure containers, etc. So it really comes down to extending your data center to the cloud now. Companies want to extend the data center to the cloud, but there's a new take on this. Excuse me. So there's a new take on this. What about extending the cloud to your data center? And that's where now we're seeing companies looking at solutions such as GKE on-prem, such as Anthos, and other solutions as well to get that backplane, that mesh up and running so that we have a container environment that we could sort of move around like a checkers board with checkers on it, and it all sort of flows evenly and nicely. It's about operational efficiency, but it's also about scaling. It's also about agility. And lastly, it really comes down to, the fact that we need to have microservices architectures, and no better open source solution or even proprietary solution does it better than Kubernetes. So if you have cloud and Kubernetes skill, add that to your LinkedIn profile, to your resume. You will likely see some kind of increase in demand. Knowing how to deploy your nodes, knowing how to deploy clusters, knowing what a pod is, knowing how to deploy an application, right? All about that. Also, too, how do we integrate with on-prem? How do we integrate with other solutions such as Jenkins or any other solution we may be using on-prem? So with that said, it just comes out to knowing how to really provide value around microservices and DevOps. Okay, what about Kubernetes and why it's so important? It has really changed the way DevOps teams now create, manage, and operate container applications. And also too, security is now at the forefront. Remember, DevSecOps sort of popped in there this year. I think we're going to see that more and more as well. So what is the demand? According to Glassdoor, salaries are about 144 average. Again, I've seen it higher. I've seen it lower. This is a skill set that's more like a bonus to add to your resume than a full-time role in a lot of organizations. So knowing Kubernetes will likely aid and abet in your job search. No question about it. So it is a skill for a job, but not always the job, is sort of the way I want to phrase that. Okay, so let's put it all together. Now, one of the things to always consider is, getting training on the appropriate solutions that you want to look at to learn, whether it's blockchain or AI, or knowing cloud, AWS or Google or Kubernetes. Chances are a quick start can help you in that process. There's live training and recorded sessions as well available in different subjects. I encourage you to look at Quick Start and see what is available. Now, when we put it all together, there's no doubt that demand for cloud skills is ever present. Other skills like Kubernetes, DevSecOps, Cloud Native are just some of the areas around development we want to focus on. So if you're a developer, those are some of the key areas to really consider. If you're looking for certifications around the cloud, my recommendation is still go with AWS or Google Cloud. Azure, again, is a niche area. And again, there's still a lot of demand for Azure, but it just seems like the demand is really targeted. AWS is really more infrastructure as a service. Azure seems to focus and have a niche area around like .NET skills, around companies that are really embedded with Microsoft-based solutions like Outlook, etc. See a lot of that as well. But AWS is clearly the leader there. Google Cloud is definitely picking up steam as we talked about. Encourage you to look into that as well. Lastly, Python is clearly a skill. If you're a developer, you really want to know as well.